Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Coronado Roundtable. We're sorry we ran out of coffee this morning, so there's no more left, and we'll skip the coffee break this morning. But that way Charlie can keep talking. So
no groans.
Welcome. I'm Christian Escoban, the president of the Coronado Roundtable, and I'm glad to have so many of you here on this beautiful Coronado morning. And as you know, we will have as our speaker Admiral Charles Martoglio, USN retired, speaking on China, Russia, Iran, and America. But first, if you will please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Read Army. Our programs are recorded live on Zoom, and for that we'd like to thank the Coronado Public Library and its staff for continuing to provide that service for us. And this morning, again, we can thank Selena Valladolid in the back for handling the audiovisual services for us. For those viewing at home, please mute your computer or device, and please also turn off your camera. You may use the chat box portion for the question and answer portion of the program. The recording will also be available in a few days on the library's YouTube channel, so stay tuned for that. For those of you in the room, please silence your mobile phones, and please hold your questions until the Q&A portion of the program. Although we do ask for $3 donation, and some of you may have paid and not gotten your coffee, for that we're sorry, and you can have a rain check for next time. And your donations are the only income we have to provide for our expenses and the donation that we provide to the library. Our program next month will feature Captain Lauren Jacoby, the Naval Base Coronado CO, and he will be speaking about the NASCAR races to be held at North Island. That will be held next month, May 22nd, here in the Wind Room. And now I know that Admiral Martoglio needs no introduction, but I will provide one anyway. It is short, so let me get out my cheat sheet here. Vice Admiral Martoglio spent half of his 40-year military career in the U.S. Navy at sea in cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft carriers, including command of the Ronald Reagan Aircraft Carrier Strike Group. He spent the other half of his career developing strategy and leading military operations, initially for the U.S. Navy and then for all U.S. military forces. He is recognized as an expert in strategic planning and continues to be an active contributor to our nation's security, advising and speaking non-politically on issues impacting America, especially those in Europe and Asia. Additionally, he teaches master's level grand strategy and defense policy at UC San Diego's School of Global Policy and Strategy. Admiral Martoglio is a 1978 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and he holds a master's degree with highest distinction in national security and strategic studies from the U.S. Naval War College. Admiral Martoglio is married to Darlene. Darlene, would you stand? Darlene is a multi-award winning commercial banking executive who is also the Roundtable's treasurer. And a member of its board of directors. Both are active in the San Diego community and live here in Coronado. Admiral Martoglio, you have.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. As I look out, I see so many friends, mentors across the years. So as I talk today and I look at specific people in the audience that I see, I'm talking to those that helped shape me in my thinking about national security, and also even more so about leadership. And so I'm delighted to be here because what a time to be able to stand in front of a group of people and talk about the challenges that are going on in our world. And as we look out, we see China, we see Russia, we see Iran, and a host of other complicators that we'll talk about. But what we really see, and what's creating the angst that many of us feel these days, is we see increasing confrontation, increasing conflict, which is a nice word for war, and a tremendous amount of uncertainty out there. So what I'd like to do over about the next 45 or 50 minutes is talk to you to help you think through some of the challenges that we see individually for our nation and globally. And there's a lot to talk about, so if it's okay with you, I'm just going to launch right into it. You know that I rarely get through all the material that I bring to a discussion like this. So I always start with a takeaway slide. If you remember nothing about what I say during this discussion, these are the things that I ask you to remember. The first is that our security is still tied to the great power competition between America and China, because all of the regional conflicts that are out there are viewed primarily or partially through the lens of the great power competition between America and China. But what we see happening now is middle powers, the Turkeys, the Indonesias, the Brazils, beginning to stand up and say, hey, we have a voice too, and we need to be recognized. And they're also taking charge of their own futures without considering America, China, or Russia's interests. They're beginning to look out first and foremost for themselves. Iran is a game changer. We don't know yet how it's going to change the game. There are some potential upsides and some fairly significant downsides. We'll talk through those later in the discussion. Regardless, tensions in the Middle East are going to be higher than they were at the beginning, and they're going to be higher for a longer period of time. Many of you know that America's strategic vulnerability, what we're most vulnerable to where an adversary can derail us, is by decoupling us from our allies. Because it's the combined economic, diplomatic, and military power that we get from that combination of America and America's allies that gives us the throw weight to deter adversaries, and if deterrence fails, to win at minimal cost. America's collection of world-leading attributes, which some of you have seen me using for years now, still holds, but the margin for error on many of those is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The banner at the bottom. When you think of economic prosperity and security, you can't have economic prosperity without security. Security is a prerequisite for economic prosperity. But you can't have security without the economics to afford to pay for the security. So as I think about this, I think of that economic security paradigm as opposite sides of the same coin. They are so interdependent. And that interdependence, what underpins our economic prosperity and what underpins our security. If you think of that two-sided coin in currency speak is denominated in trust. So those are the 5 takeaways that if you remember nothing else about what I talk about today, that's what I'm going to ask you to remember. You've seen versions of this slide over the years as well. But what you may notice is it's busier than ever. And what it's busy with is more complex and more dangerous than ever. But the banner at the bottom still holds. It's a lot of stuff. It's all complex and it's all interrelated. So while you may be able to come up with an easy fix to one of those issues up there, you complicate 2, 3, 4, or 5 other issues. This is a slide as to why do we feel uneasy? What's changing in our world? And I'm happy to answer questions about anything on any of my slides during the Q&A, but I'm only going to talk about certain things just so I can get through most of what I think is important this morning. So what's different today than 5 years ago or 10 years ago? The first, obviously, is the number of conflicts and their severity that's going on around the world. This is, without question, the most challenging period of time that we've ever been in the last 40 or 50 years. We, America, we're expending treasure, people, money, and equipment. We're expending at a time when our primary adversary, China, is sitting there building all 3 of those. Long-honored security thresholds are in motion. Things like talking about nuclear weapons. 5 years ago, there was virtually no discussion about the use of nuclear weapons. 5 years ago being pre-Ukraine. And while America has been pretty responsible in talking and discussing and planning, other nations not so much. And you get into this tit for tat. The law of war. The law of war covers 2 things: when you can go to war and protecting civilians. It's that civilian protection piece that is under assault today on many different sides. And what that does is that lowers the threshold. The law of war is designed to protect you. It's designed to protect all of us. It says if you go after a target militarily, it has to have military value. Its value must be proportional to the number of civilians killed, and you got to minimize civilian deaths. And for those in the audience here who've had military command in combat, you know that when you're flying and conducting combat missions, one of the people that's sitting right next to the commander is who? The JAG. That's exactly right, the lawyer. And that's changing now. It's becoming more acceptable to have civilian casualties, especially in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war. We see border sovereignty is threatened. You can see the other things that are up there on the slide. Law of the sea is being challenged today. And of course, one of America's benefits over the last 50 or 60 years has been trade and trade movement. You start mucking with the law of the sea, the ability to freely use the oceans, and you start winding up with parts of the world that are very similar to what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz today. We see inexpensive weapons having an effect against more powerful adversaries. More destructive power is available in more unstable places. China and Russia, without question, it's not even debatable, are gearing their economies for war. Russia's already there. China's in the process of doing it in the guise of self-sufficiency and self-sustainability. But another way to put that is a wartime economy. Remember, these are reasons why we all feel uncomfortable today. That interdependence between economics and security. What that does is that gives governments the opportunity to weaponize, kind of an overused word, to weaponize economics. For example, energy, Strait of Hormuz, is being used as a weapon today. It's being used as a weapon to squeeze Iran and for Iran to squeeze the rest of the world. SWIFT access. SWIFT is the international banking standard actually it's located in Europe, but used as a penalty. Russia kicked out of SWIFT access as a result of the Ukraine war. We saw America put up tariffs on China last year, and what did China do? Turn around and say, well, we're not going to sell you any rare earths. What did we do? We said, okay, we better lower the barrier a little bit. So what you see is economics being used as weapons to achieve security or economic objectives. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. You know, as a strategist, one of the things that we're taught is use all of the tools in your toolkit, economic tools, diplomatic tools, military tools, in order to achieve your objectives. And so this is using economic tools to achieve either economic, diplomatic, or military objectives. So it's not inherently a bad thing, but the second, third, and fourth order effects of things like closure of the Straits of Hormuz is not a good thing. And then you see the commitment uncertainty of America to America's allies, our commitment uncertainty, versus the capability uncertainty of Russia and China. Russia stumbled pretty badly going into the Russia-Ukraine war, and China really hasn't fought a war since they fought Vietnam in 1979 and lost. I don't mean to minimize China, but I don't mean to maximize them either. You have to pay attention to what's going on there. The bottom line is why we feel this angst today is because if you look at that spectrum of engagement on the bottom of the slide, from cooperation to competition to confrontation to conflict, we are clearly moving to the right side of that spectrum, and we're moving at an accelerated pace today. And that's not a good thing. Quickly on the great power competition, just as a refresher, America and our allies on one side, China on the other, along with Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Great power competition, America and allies, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, in a rising multipolar landscape. It used to be just a bipolar landscape. Now we're starting to see other poles sticking their heads up. For example, India some of the middle powers, Turkey, Brazil, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia. We hear talk about the global south. And we even see Europe beginning to say, hey, we're a pole in this. We're not entirely subservient to America. Where's this playing out? Global geography. You know, we see on the Korean Peninsula, we see the Indian-Chinese border. We see India, Pakistan. We see Iran. We see Russia, Ukraine. And these are challenging scenarios that are going on as we sit here and talk about global security. So what's going on in geography? Geography still counts. Having possession of land is still important. What's going on in the international domains? The international domains, the high seas, international airspace, space, and cyberspace. The international domains are domains that no nation has control of per se. No nation can deny another nation access. All nations have access to the international domains. The high seas, international airspace, space, and cyberspace. All nations have access. And yet we see the great power competition taking place inside of the international domains. The South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, the East China Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Strait of Hormuz, all in play and all international domains. And we see the impact on worldwide economies. Economics being used as weapons to achieve objectives. And often when you do that, the second, third, and fourth order effects have impact that are not positive. So what's at risk in this great power competition? Sovereignty. Because what is this great power competition really about? It's about two things. It's about how you're governed, some sort of bottom-up democracy where everybody gets some level of influence in what's going on in their world, recognizing that not all democracies are the same. Or is it top-down authoritarianism like China and Russia? And so when you talk about the great power competition, you're not talking about some nice hypothetical thought that's out there. You're talking about how are you going to be governed? Top-down direction or bottom-up democracy? And how is your economic system? How is your prosperity determined? Is it regulated free markets like we have? Or is it state-sponsored capitalism where the government picks the winners and losers? And so as you look how you're governed and how you organize your economic system, here's a rhetorical question. Are those things that you fight over? Are those things that you're willing to go to war over to preserve how you're governed and how you organize your economic system? So this is pretty serious stuff that we're talking about here, because not only does it affect everybody in this room, but it affects all the generations after us. Your children, your children's children, their children. The banner at the bottom. If you remember nothing else about the great power competition, I ask you to remember that neither side has to win the great power competition. There's plenty in the world to go around for two completely separate systems. But neither side can afford to lose the great power competition. Why? Because if you lose, you subordinate yourself to Beijing. And you subordinate your economic system to state-sponsored capitalism, where all the profits go back to Beijing. So you don't have to win because there's plenty to go around. You don't have to beat the other guy into submission, but you can't afford to lose. So how's this playing out today in the real world? On the left side of the slide here, I've listed some attributes. from ones that we need to protect at the top, all the way to things at the bottom where if you don't cooperate, you can't even achieve your own objectives because they require international cooperation. So what you see happening today is a lot of posturing going on among the bipolar participants. China, Russia on one side, America and our allies on the other, as we try to figure out where do we put this intersection point on this list of attributes over here. Efficiency-wise, you want that point to be as high as you can because there's efficiency in putting resources where you get the greatest return on investment. But you don't want to give away the family jewels, the critical technologies, the high technologies, all the things that an adversary can turn against you if deterrence fails and conflict results. And so that's what's going on right now. Both America and China are playing for time. Remember when I talked earlier about the tariffs and the rare earths? And I said both sides agreed to lower both of the threshold of both of those for 1 year. That 1 year expires in October. That 1 year is because both sides are playing for time right now, because neither side has enough to prevail against the other unto itself. And so they're playing for time to do what? To build up self-sufficiency. We're looking to build up self-sufficiency in the ability to extract rare earths. When I say self-sufficiency, I don't mean inside of America by itself, but America and our allies. And the Chinese are looking to build up self-sufficiency in technology. So we're both playing for time right now. They want technology, we want rare earths. So it's not bad that we're in this playing for time dimension right now, because that does allow the opportunity to negotiate, discuss, and try to agree to some sort of path ahead. And these are the topics that President Trump and President Xi will discuss in Beijing in the middle of May. These are the ones that I'm watching: technology, Taiwan, trade, tariffs, and geopolitical tension. The two that I'm really watching are technology, making sure we don't give away too much to the Chinese, and Taiwan, not changing any of the wording associated with America's commitment or strategic ambiguity relative to Taiwan. Because the reality is, there's only two scenarios relative to Taiwan: status quo and war. Got to preserve that status quo. There's three ways to get to that future: discussion and negotiation, which is good. This playing for time allows the opportunity to do discussion and negotiation. You can wake up every morning, look across to see what the Chinese are doing, and they can look across and see what we're doing. And you adjust your policies on kind of a tit for tat. I see what you're doing. We're going to go to war. It's the only three ways to get to the future. So of those three ways, which is the best? My mind, clearly discussion and negotiation. But you got to know what you're doing in the negotiation. You got to know where your red lines are, and you got to strategize for it to get something beneficial for your side out of it. I want to talk a little bit about Iran, because I know that's what a lot of you are interested in. Normally, I talk China, Russia, others. Today, I'm going to talk Iran, Russia, and then China. Geography. About 2.5 times the size of Texas, 93 million people. America is about 340 million, to just kind of size it with you. You can see where we have military facilities in the Middle East. 20% of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. It's about 90 miles long. I look out and I see a whole bunch of people that I know have spent time in the Straits of Hormuz. It's not pleasant. It's ugly. It's narrow. There's lots of ships. It's a complex radar environment, and it's a real challenge. And Iran, who has always known how important it is, now really knows how important it is to the rest of the world. And it's clearly being used as a weapon by Iran against the rest of the world. One side is Iran, the other side is the United Arab Emirates and Oman. This is the strait here. United Arab Emirates, Oman on the west side, Iran on the north side. The Bab el-Mandeb, you don't hear quite as much about today, but it was in the news about a year or so ago. The Bab el-Mandeb is at the exit to the Red Sea. Why is that important? Most of the Middle East's oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz. But there is a pipeline that runs from Saudi to the Red Sea. And that pipeline, while it can't handle all the oil, can't even handle an appreciable percentage, it is handling some. And so that oil is being loaded in the Red Sea and goes through the Bab el-Mandeb. And where does that oil mostly go to? Yeah, China and Asia. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But it goes to Asia. So you can see who threatens the Bab el-Mandeb. Yeah, the Houthis, who are funded and supported by Iran. So if they decide to close off, and they haven't yet, they're pretty wary. They want to make sure that, if Iran falls, the Houthis don't fall too. So they're building a little bit of a cushion between the Houthis and Iran. But if they do close the Bab el-Mandeb or threaten to close it like the Strait of Hormuz, how do ships get to Asia? Through the Suez Canal, all the way around Africa, and then off to Asia. Radically changes oil distribution around the globe. That's why the Strait of Hormuz is so important. Let's talk a little bit about the strategic environment. Not a criticism of going after Khomeini on day one of this current campaign. But he was the only individual in all of Iran who could control the various disparate entities that have security roles in Iran, whether it's internal security, external security, their traditional military, the Republican Guards, the proxies. Only Khomeini could control them all. And they had a plan, which they developed over the last 5 to 10 years, that said, if we are ever decapitated, the leadership is decapitated, control of the military forces, including the Republican Guard, gets distributed. Basically giving the keys to the launchers to hundreds of people and say, never give up. And that's what we see playing out today is, who do you negotiate with that can then say, I'm going to bottom line this agreement, and then all the forces agree to stop fighting? Making it even more complicated is the fact that it's an existential fight. That's a kind of a fancy word, but what it really means is that if I lose, I'm going to die. So I'm not going to give up under any circumstances, as long as there's the slightest hope of winning, because if I surrender, I know I'm going to die. Maybe not at the hands of my belligerent adversary, probably at the hands of the Iranian citizens. So how do you get somebody who's holding the keys to a launcher to agree to some peace agreement with America when they know it's existential for them personally, not just the government? So when you talk about regime change, that is a huge step, which is rarely successful. And it's really playing out here. About a third of Iran's missile and drone inventory remains. How many strikes have we run in Iran right now? What's the latest tally? Anybody? It's actually about 16,000. 16 now. Some of that is hitting the same target a couple times. But we've done 16,000 sorties. But again, Iran knew this was coming for the last 40 years. So what have they been doing? Burying their capabilities, hardening and burying. And you have a little tunnel and you roll out the launcher, you fire your missile, and the launcher goes back in the tunnel where you've got 40 or 50 more missiles. The Strait of Hormuz remains vulnerable to missile, drone, and mine attack. Iran's probable strategic mistake, and I say probable because it's not entirely certain, but the fact that they attacked other Arab nations, not our bases in other Arab nations, but actually launched missiles into Dubai, into Riyadh. An Arab attacking an Arab, the attacked Arab never forgets. So if it was existential to the commander of the missile battery here, from America's perspective, and from the Iranian people's perspective, all other Arabs that were attacked by Iran are now after you too. It's triple existential. These guys are not going to give up without a fight. U.S. allies are wary of long-term entrapment. You hear, our allies aren't doing enough. There is some truth to that. I mean, there are things that you can do to support an ally short of getting into the fight. But nothing in the NATO charter or any of our alliances with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines says anything about fighting in the Middle East. There's no commitment for them to do that. And their position is, you planned this in secret. You didn't tell us. We had no time to prepare. The second and third order effects are more on me than they are on you. No, we're not going to help you out on this one until there's a peace deal, in part because the threat is real, that's still there. And they don't want to commit their forces. They don't want to get them entrapped in a long duration campaign. Iran's government, they can't appear weak even if they are. So what am I getting at by this point here? If I were to give one piece of advice to the administration, it would be take your diplomacy quietly and privately. Do not bash the Iranian leadership and tell them you've ground them into nothing. Because if they ever get to a peace agreement, they're going to appear weak. You got to give them an off-ramp that allows them at least the fig of saying, we did okay against the Americans. That's the only way. Why? Because if they appear weak, who's coming after them? Their people and all the other Arabs. Sometimes diplomacy with a megaphone is good. Sometimes diplomacy with a megaphone is counterproductive. So what are our objectives in Iran? These are the 6 that have been publicly enumerated. They're all good objectives. You can't really argue with any of them. You can probably talk about regime change, but let's not. No nuclear weapons. How can you object to that? That's a good objective. The systems that deliver nuclear weapons, got to put limits on those, ranges and numbers. We've destroyed their Navy, but not the Republican Guard Navy. The big ships are gone. The submarines are gone. But what's still there? The small boats with RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, machine guns, and drones, and cruise missiles. We've devastated their military, but not the IRGC. And we want them to eliminate support for the proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Those are 5 righteous objectives. It will be a challenge to achieve them. Absolutely hope we do. Those are good objectives. These objectives, these 4 here, would be above and beyond what the 2015 JCPOA, Joint Capability Plan of Action, that was negotiated with Iran on their nuclear weapons. And the criticism, rightfully so, was that, okay, you could say no nukes, but what about the missile systems that carry them? What about their military forces that threaten to close the strait? What about support for all the proxies that are causing all the angst in the Middle East? So those are all very, very good objectives. And they could have been and should have been part of the 2015 JCPOA, but they weren't, because you couldn't get the Iranians to budge even back then. And you're going to see the same sort of stalling today, because they finally figured out what their hammer is, and their hammer is the Strait of Hormuz. Secondary effects. We see middle powers now understanding the value of a nuclear weapon, and they all want one. If I have a nuclear weapon, nobody's going to attack me. Think North Korea. We see mid-sized powers now able to hold off superpowers. Ukraine holding off Russia, Iran holding off America. Because of technology, cheap technology that middle powers and smaller countries can afford, that can inflict damage on big powers' military forces. China, increasingly reliant on Russia for their oil. America's alliance network is under strain. China is increasingly meeting with world leaders saying, we're the stable country here. You want to align yourself with us. It's not true, but that's what they're saying. And we see international law of the sea being challenged globally, which has tremendous impact in places like the Arctic, the Strait of Hormuz, South and East China Seas, Bab el-Mandeb, Strait of Gibraltar. Impact is well beyond Iran. This is not US-Iran. This is great power competition and everything between Iran and the great power competition. Small nations, middle powers, and the great nations. Negotiating positions. I don't want to talk a whole lot about this other than, the US has 4 key points that we're pushing for, and they're all the right points. That's what we ought to be pushing for. Iran, on the other side, says, we're not going to agree to any of that. There are other options beside a negotiated peace. One side can just walk away, do a ceasefire or truce that just kind of stumbles along. You can reach an armistice like North and South Korea after the Korean War. Right now, we're in a stalemate. one side or both sides can just choose to disengage. Or we could say, you start doing anything in the nuclear world or rebuilding your missile capabilities, we're coming back and we're going to periodically re-engage to make sure you don't get that capability back. A near constant state of war. That then means Iran will be holding the Straits of Hormuz in a near constant state of paralysis. Difficult positions to negotiate. It's not going to happen quickly. So what's the outcome? Who knows? Anybody who says they do know doesn't have a whole lot of credibility. There's so many variables at play here. So what we're doing increasingly in the world of strategy is we talk in terms of a range of futures. A US compliant Iran, highly unlikely. That was the desire going in, but it's not going to happen. What's the best possible outcome where we are today? Is some sort of Islamic regime minus, something less hardened, something that has more of a global view, something that's willing to work inside the Gulf, work with regional partners, take a less confrontational view with America, and provide less support for stirring the pot inside the Middle East with Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. That's the best possible. The most probable, a hardened regime, a regime harder than Khomeini. And they survive. Tensions will continue at a higher level than when we went in. And it's going to require a long-term commitment by multiple nations, not just the US, to keep oil flowing through the Straits of Hormuz. And that's if we get a negotiated settlement. Let's shift to Russia. I'm only going to talk about a couple things on this slide. Russia's national security strategy, believe it or not, there's a document called the National Security Strategy of the Russian Federation, just like there's a national security strategy of the United States of America. The very first bullet is the primary focus of Putin's strategy, which he signed in 2021, a year before the war in Ukraine. And it talked about returning the Russian Federation to great power status. So now let's come over here to Ukraine. What are Putin's war objectives in Ukraine? Geography in Ukraine, to be sure, if not all of Ukraine, the eastern third. Fracturing the European Union, rolling back and dividing NATO, and isolating Europe from America. How do you think Putin's doing on those objectives? You think he's feeling pretty good? Demand a Russia-compliant Ukraine. The one on that banner at the bottom, I think, is the interesting one. Remember, this is a year before Ukraine. It says, and strengthen Russia to be an independent, co-equal great power in a multipolar world, subordinate to no nation. When he wrote this document, who was he talking to, subordinate to no nation? Yeah, China. China. Often people say America or Europe. The real answer is China. So he views Russia's back, it counts, and we're not going anywhere. We could spend hours talking about Ukraine. I just want to hit just a couple highlights. Right now, it's a military stalemate while both sides are posturing for negotiation. Both sides are playing for time. More Russia, Putin genuinely believes time is on his side. The only thing against Russia playing for time is their economy is teetering right now pretty precariously. But what's happened in the last 4 weeks? The oil crisis. And what have we done relative to Russian oil sanctions? We've removed the oil sanctions. And what is China doing to make up for oil that's not coming out of the Straits of Hormuz? Buying Russian oil. So, when I talk about all of these issues being connected and interdependent, here we're trying to do something relative to Iran's nuclear weapons and their effect on the world. And at the same time, the secondary and tertiary effects are strengthening Russia, who's fighting a war against Ukraine, which is in Europe, where we have a commitment, not in Ukraine, but the rest of Europe, to defend against the Russians. Ukraine's strategy is to position for an acceptable negotiation. Interestingly enough, by holding the front line and attacking Russia's periphery and their economic base, their oil transport systems and wells, Ukraine's doing pretty well. Ukraine has also gotten a boost from Iran because they are the leaders today in unmanned and autonomous systems. Cheap unmanned and autonomous systems. So you actually saw Zelensky during war leave Ukraine and go to Saudi and work these mega deals to get him money because he now exports his technology because Ukraine knows more about that kind of warfare than anybody else. You see the web that's being, the complexity that we're talking about, there's just no silver bullet to fix all of this. He's also reduced the need for US support. They still need things from the US, but they're not life dependent on it anymore. They've got other sources. They count on Europe for some of that ammunition, but they count on Europe mostly for money because they're not getting it from us anymore. They've tied Europe's security future to Ukraine's pretty successfully. And in the next slide, I'll show you how the Russians have done the same thing, helping Ukraine tie Europe to Ukraine. And they're branching out beyond Europe into the Middle East now, selling their drone technology. This conflict, some people say, why is this of interest to America? It's of interest to America because Russia is in this gray zone competition, this gray zone confrontation with the rest of Europe. Everything on this slide has happened in the last year, 18 months. Russia confronting or conflicting, going to warlike gray zone tactics against Europe. Underwater activity against cables that provide all the connectivity that economically, diplomatically, and militarily all nations around the world count on. The Russians and others, including us, we map these continuously. We know where the vulnerabilities are. The Russians are going a step further right now. You could see some of that unclassified in media last week relative to the United Kingdom. Russia providing support to cyber entities. And it's not that the Russian government is hacking your account. It's that this guy here is hacking your account and the Russians are looking the other way because you're on Russian soil. They might even be just quietly paying you under the table. Nuclear threats, again, Putin probably the most irresponsible leader in talking about nuclear weapons, firing warning shots at NATO aircraft. Anybody fly into the Baltics recently? Probably not, but it's probably a good thing. How many people think GPS works in the Baltics? It doesn't. It's always jammed. There's no GPS in the Baltics right now. Spoofing navigation systems. This is one of my favorite displaced border markers. So you're Estonia, I'm Russia. Here's the border marker. I'm a Russian. What am I going to do with this border marker? Am I going to try to go into Estonia? No, I'm going to pull it closer to me so that your soldiers come and say, that's not in the right place. Try to move it back. And the Russians say, Estonian soldier on Russian land, I'm going to capture or kill him. That's the stuff that's going on today in an area where we have an ironclad commitment to defend Europe under the North Atlantic Charter, NATO, Article 5 of the North Atlantic Charter. Putin is opportunistic. If he senses an opportunity, he's going to take it. It's already more than confrontation. And Putin has a real problem because even though his economy is kind of teetering right now, it's a wartime economy. And if he tries to reset by bringing all those soldiers home, finding jobs for them, it's going to be a very, very complex task. Makes his longevity more at risk. There's very little to entice Putin to give up what he has. So why do we care about this? I always go back to the economics. Europe is America's largest trading partner by far. About $1.5 trillion a year in two-way trade versus about $415 in 2025 with China. Pre-tariffs, China was about $600 billion a year. So tariffs have brought China down a little bit, but not anywhere close to 1.5 trillion. That's serious money. That's economic integration. That's the economic security coin. You can't have one without the other. You have about $4 trillion each invested in each other's economy. America has $4 trillion in Europe. Europe has $4 trillion in America. About a quarter of our gross domestic product comes from trade with Europe, international trade, not trade with Europe. And 16 million American jobs are tied to Europe. So the banner at the bottom, Europe's economy matters to America. They count economically. And the America-Europe economic connection is the key. There are a lot of sub-keys. It's the key to countering China. I'm going to skip over the China slide in the interest of just getting to the end here. Why do I talk about economics? You know, for the military folks that are in the audience here, any of you want to go into a competition, a confrontation, or a war with a level playing field? Hell no. I want overwhelming superiority on my side, if not supremacy. And I think of economic power just like I think about military firepower. The more economic power I have, the better off I am in a competition or confrontation. America's gross domestic product is about $30 trillion a year. Gross domestic product is a summation of all goods and services produced by America. $30 trillion a year. Europe's is about $25 trillion a year. Almost as big as ours, but not quite. The rest of our allies, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines, add about another $5 trillion. So I can go into this competition with China, and I can confront this increasingly challenging world with $60 trillion of assets behind me, as opposed to just my $30 trillion, to go against China, which is about $20 trillion in gross domestic product compared to our 30, and Russia, which is $2.2 trillion a year. China and Russia combined about $22 trillion versus 60 trillion. Whose side do you want to be on in that competition? I want to be on the 60 trillion side. That's the value of allies and alliances. In addition to the pooling of resources such that you're not spending all your money to do military tasks that other folks can help you do and do as well and defray the cost. But you gotta treat them right to get them into voluntary contributions. Not, we're not talking about fighting inside NATO here. We're talking about fighting elsewhere in the world. There's no commitment, hard and fast. They'll do it if it's in their national interest and they have some say. But you can't mandate it and you can't surprise them. Every element of national power is enhanced with friends and allies. The balance of power tips dramatically towards America and our allies. Got to focus on that economic strength. Growing domestic product, growing gross domestic product is a great way to do that. I watch the GDP, even though some people say it's kind of a dated way of watching the economy. Got to preserve the primacy of the dollar. Dollar used in international trade, and then the dollar as the global reserve currency. When things get bad, people buy dollars. In both of those, why is the dollar valued? Why not the yuan? Why not the euro? Why not the yen? First of all, it's the scale. We're huge. But anytime you buy something, especially buy debt, I'm going to buy your debt. I'm saying I trust, there's that trust word again. I trust that when that debt matures, you're going to be able to pay me back. And I trust that you're going to make good decisions between now and that period of time. Interestingly enough, the Iran conflict has actually helped the dollar. Money flowed to the dollar in this crisis. It has not destabilized the dollar. But I watch that very closely because the dollar is based on the value of the dollar internationally, which underpins us hugely, underpins our debt, which we can't afford to pay back without the dollar being the world's reserve currency and trade currency. We can't afford to pay back the $36 trillion of debt America has today. Last year, America spent more on the interest that we owe than the entire Defense Department budget. Got to protect the dollar. Got to reduce deficits. Got to strengthen America's security. We got to harden America itself. For all of our lifetimes, we had these great moats, the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean and friendly neighbors, Canada and Mexico. We didn't have to worry about people attacking the American homeland. That's not true anymore, because now you've got cyber weapons, you got hypersonics, you got ballistic missiles, you got cruise missiles you can put in canisters on container ships. You got migration. There are threats to America, our homeland, that we've never had to deal with before. So we got to harden America while not forgetting about our military capabilities, because we are an expeditionary military force. What is an expeditionary military force? In football parlance, we only play away games, right? We don't fight on the beaches of San Diego. We fight on other people's beaches. That requires equipment that's in training, equipment that's at home resting, equipment that's transiting, and equipment that's forward. It's a fairly expensive way to do things. And now we've got to replenish all the stuff that we've been shooting. That makes the case for our allies even more important. This idea of pooled resources. We've got to toughen and strengthen our security alliances. I have no toleration for freeloading. The administration's absolutely right, holding other nations' feet to the fire, that they got to pay for their defense. Having said that, what you got to do is you got to look at the bigger picture too, and look to make sure that what you're doing doesn't destabilize them economically so they can afford to pay that increase for their defense, because we benefit by adding up all the ships that Europe, America, Japan, South Korea can marshal against our global adversaries, and all of our service members, and all of the defense budgets. This is an efficiency issue as much as it is a military capability issue. It's how do you efficiently use your resources? And investing heavily in the next generation of technology. 2 more slides. So what's America's range of futures? What we would like to be is the global hegemon, kind of like we were coming out of the Cold War, early 90s, mid 90s, early 2000s. Highly unlikely we're ever going back there. Because what's different now is we've got a very, very powerful competitor in China. Global balance of power with primacy in the Western Hemisphere. That's probably the most likely scenario. You know, when I showed you early as we pulled those 2 sine waves apart and pushed them closer together, that will be the balance of power wherever that settles out, where both sides have about equal global influence and equal global power, except in the Western Hemisphere, where we will be the hemispheric hegemon. And that's okay. Sometimes you hear talk of spheres of influence, less likely than a balance of power, hopefully much less likely, because this is really only a hedging strategy. If our primary strategy of a balance of power doesn't work out, what do we fall back to? We fall back to our sphere of influence, which is the Americas. But that also means that there are going to be other spheres of influence out there that aren't friendly to us. A Russian sphere, an Asian sphere, a Chinese sphere. So that's kind of America's range of futures. The most likely is this global balance of power, which is why discussions between leaders like President Trump and President Xi are so important, and that we go in with a clear set of objectives in mind. And it's okay to walk away if we can't get good objectives or good results out of the negotiation. Last slide. Some of you have seen this before because I've used it for a long, long time. On the left side of the slide, all the times people said, America's best days are behind it. America will never be as good as it once was. Starting in about 1949, when Russia tested their hydrogen bomb, Sputnik and the missile crisis, Vietnam, Japan buying America. You can see all the times that America's sunset was predicted. And yet, here we sit, even today, without question, the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, economically, diplomatically, militarily, from a technological perspective. So if our sunset has been predicted so many times, how come we're still here? And the answer is, I call it American robustness. These are all of the attributes where America leads the world. Or is a strong second, but most of them we lead the world. Only America has a list like this. Nobody else, in terms of the substance of each of the bullets and the number of bullets that are up there. These are the attributes that we ought to be honoring and reinforcing. This is what has carried us through these last 70 years to ensure that we remain powerful, secure, and economically prosperous. And our collection of world-leading attributes and the ability to sustain them if we choose favors America for decades in everything that I've been talking about. But take a look at some of those. You'll see the margin for error is getting thinner. Once they're gone, they won't come back. Another way of saying that is we're going to win unless we make ourselves lose. And I'm going to end there, turn it back over to Christian for a minute, and then I guess we'll go into questions.